I believe that over the course of this video, there is going to be chocolate on my nose. I need you to forgive me. Yeah. Hi, I'm Josh. Welcome today to my channel, Josh's Bookish Voyage. I'm here today to give you my wrap up for spring of 2024. So this wrap up is going to be different than my last wrap up. I've just been trying to find my rhythm as far as how I want to do TBRs and wrap ups because I'm doing seasonal TBRs and wrap ups. So I'm going back to my traditional way of doing it. I'm just going to do one massive, long, extensive wrap up of every single book that I read in this last quarter from April through June of 2024. I read a total of 36 books. I'm not going to do a deep dive into stats. You can get some preliminary information in my media wrap up. Other than that, I'll give a deep dive into my reading stats at the end of the year. But because I'm doing a massive wrap up, I don't want to have to deal with 36 different covers. So I'm just going to be doing a screen record and showing you basically the books as I scroll through them on Goodreads. So without further ado, let's talk about all the books that I read in this quarter. I'm going to go from April through June, basically chronological. Starting up at number 1, The Possession of Natalie Haynes. No, that's not right. The Possession of Natalie Glasgow. This is by Hailey Piper. I gave it a 4-star. It is basically a possession story. 3 months removed from it. I can't tell you. Actually, it's more like 4 months at this point. I think I liked it, but I found it to be just okay. I have found that I love Hailey Piper, and this is one of her earliest works. She does a lot of queer, sort of graphic or body horror related, Lovecraftian at times horror. This one, I guess you could say, is forgettable. Like, I think it did something to make it feel like it was different than traditional possession story, but in retrospect, all I can remember is that I remember that being, I liked that one tiny bit, but other than that, it was kind of unexceptional. A solid read, hence the 4 stars, but not something that, hits it out of the park. Next up, by Mira Grant, aka Sean McGuire, we have When Will You Ride, which is a collection of, I think, dystopian into the world apocalypse novellas. Actually, it's just 2. It's just 2. And I think that there was like an Audible sale, and I bought 2 of them. And I think one related to like a starting of a random apocalypse, like a standalone. Another one was the beginning of, I think, her Newsflash. I think I preferred the one that was a standalone, which was like, it was like a friend group meeting up, and one of them thought that the world was coming. This one was probably a little bit less forgettable. I gave it 4.5 stars, but now that I'm thinking of it, maybe it's close to a 4-star. I really liked one of them, and the other one was just okay from what I remember. Oh God, I'm going to be redoing a lot of my ratings here. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that one. Next up is Welcome to Forever by Nathan Tavers. This was a cyberpunk, not virtual reality, maybe virtual reality, simulation type, dystopian future about this queer couple or married couple who are problematic, get separated and come back together. I thought it was actually a really well realized world as far as the cyberpunk side, but I felt like it was a little bit lacking in terms of some of the ideas it was trying to explore. For what it's worth, like, there's a lot you could do in this kind of cyberspace. And I also was reading this like fresh off of having Red Room City, which had a lot of problems, but I felt like knew the ideas I wanted to explore. While here, this one felt a little bit limited, not quite considering the full implications of the world. But I felt like there was some more could have been done there. I have a full review for that. You can check that out if you want to see it, but that's my thoughts there. I'm going to give that one 4. I gave it 4.5 at the time, but in retrospect, I'm giving it 4. I love this idea of going back and, retrospectively giving a rating, because I feel like I'm more equipped at rating a book with some time removed. Next up, we have My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. And this was a reread. I gave it 5 stars. I think I liked it even more than the first time. I have a full review for this and the entire series, so I won't, spend too much time on it. Actually, probably my favorite video of the year so far is that review. A Native American or indigenous teenage girl is struggling in school, and she's convinced a slasher is about to start in her town. And this is an homage to a classic horror, and while it hits the classic tropes, it also challenges them, and it does so masterfully. A deeper conversation in my review. I try to stay spoiler free, other than discussing broader themes, but refer you to there. After that, we have Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. which I read, and I found it underwhelming compared to book two. Because I went reread book one, before I read book two, and I was like, oh, I love this now. After using a little bit of not study reads, but reading aids, and I go into this one finding myself just a little bit more bored. It felt more like a chore. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. This was not enough to like cut me off from the series, but I could clearly see a trend. I'm really hoping. I'm reading book 4 this season, this quarter, and I'm really hoping that I can get back into the swing of things. I'm probably going to go back to some reading aids to make sure that I'm caught up on the details, not just going into the book, but also in the middle of the book. I think that might have helped me. Maybe just making sure I'm using reading aids to make sure I'm following who's who. Because like in the moment, I understand what's going on, but I don't know if I necessarily always remember in retrospect who I was with in the moment, if that makes sense. I don't probably thinking to yourself, Josh, are you actually reading these books? I don't know. I'm just trying my best to reflect on how I'm reading and how I can improve that for such a big tome. Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones. Book 2, again, this continues Jade's story. She is the teen from book 1. And I love this. It's one of my favorite in the series. I think it really did the work to establish that this series deserved to be a series, that it was a good continuation from where we left off, while also being its own thing and letting the characters evolve in a significant manner, in a way that I think really changes the story, but also allows us to see some real growth in our characters. Like it is just, I think, the perfect sequel in so many ways, and it does everything the first book does right, and then some. Loved it. 5 stars, maybe 6 stars. After that, we have Alien Earths by Lisa Kaltenegger, and I have a standalone review for this one as well. This one was a fine, solid intro to science, sort of space science book, with some touching on information touching on exoplanetary research. I just found it underwhelming. I found like I've read a lot of these, and while it's perfectly competent, it didn't do anything to really stand out. I just don't see how it's going to be relevant when it's not recent. I think its relevancy is its recency, especially when it comes to space science. And I just think it's fine. I just feel like there are things I'm end up preferring more often than this. And in fact, if you watch the review, you'll see there were some books I actually do refer you to. Yeah, it was good. Give it 3.5 stars, and I feel confident about that rating actually. Then up at The Angel of Indian Lake, book 3, also 5 stars, not quite as high as book 2, but still I think a solid conclusion. I really found it very satisfying. I think it actually subverted my expectations. Perhaps it shouldn't have, but I think it was part of the horror homages and like the pulling in quotes or references, sometimes explicitly to classic horror. And even before it would make explicit statements, I was like, this is clearly dynamic from such and such, and this ended a certain type of way, and I know it must be what it's saying, it's going to happen to her. And I think it does a really good job of using horror cliches and referencing horror classics in a way that allows the story to honor them, and at times repeat some of the things that happen, while also challenging them in a really, I think, thoughtful and fun, but also expansive way, a way that makes it a new way of approaching it. Is what I'm trying to say. So far, I think it's clear, at least to me, that my favorite thing so far is the Angel of Indian Lake. For the things I'm talking about now, I'm loving it. Oh my god. Let's keep going. The Gods Themselves by Isaac Asimov was fine. I gave it 3 stars, and boy does it deserve that. It's 2 alternate universes. Fine. One of them find a way to basically exchange matter in a way that causes a net energy increase for them. Basically, like generate an energy source. But then they find that doing so, that sort of movement of matter across universes causes the universe properties to change in a way that will have damaging effects on the things that exist in the universes. And as a concept, I think it's actually fascinating. It's really cool to think how this works, how it would translate, and how it could, I think, act as a mirror to climate change. I'm not sure if that's what he was going for here, but it definitely works modern day as a climate change statement. My problem was twofold. One, I feel like it was a little too cleanly fixed in the end. 2, he spends a lot of time in the alternate universe, setting up a world that I just found not very interesting. I felt like it was trying too hard to be different while also being a little too similar. And I just found myself asking, why are we here? Like, how is this adding to the basic conflict that we're dealing with? And to me, it felt kind of like fluff. And it just wasn't what I was hoping for when I was seeing this book explore this really fascinating idea. And ultimately, I just find it lackluster. So 3 stars, a fascinating idea, does not live up to my expectations. The Dead Take the A Train, 4 stars, a solid 4 stars. If anything, I might even push it up a bit, like 4.25, maybe 4.5. For now, I'm going to keep it at 4 in my log. But this is a duo authorship by Cassandra Clare and Richard Codley. And I think I want to do this thinking urban fantasy is fine. Like, I find myself struggling to really get into urban fantasy. Maybe it's just because they tend to lean into sort of campy vibes, and it often feels YA in a way that I just find, I guess, I don't love as much as I used to as a kid. Flipped that a complete 180 to this, where I reminded me of a kid, I meant like teenager. It reminded me of Buffy, and maybe more specifically Angel. The sort of campiness, the grittiness, but also a sort of the gritty city life as sort of embedded or immersed in demons, or in this case more Lovecraftian dark magic type thing. And the vibes were just there for me. I was astonished at how much I just felt like I was back in the world of Angel, to be specific. I talk about this book in my media freakout tag, but I love this. I'm excited to keep reading it. It's my first time reading Cassandra Clare, and I'm so excited to have a very positive response to this. And for me, I think it really was, not the fact that it was a solid book, but I think really decent character work. Characters that feel real and somewhat fleshed out. It's not perfect, but it was solid, mixed with the vibes being perfectly what I want them to be when it comes to what I loved most about Angel, and specifically, again, Buffy, or other way around. Just because of the fact that the setting is adult and in that city type vibe. Next up, we have The Shape of a Life by Xin-Tong Yao. This I gave 1 star. It's not that the writing is particularly bad. It's just that I'm an academic, research postdoc, I guess. And I've just become, I guess, more familiar with certain types in academia. And this guy just gave me certain vibes of being the worst of academia, being very artificially or faux humble in a way that felt very fake. Like, I guess the word faux gives that, but it just felt as if he was trying to present himself as humble, but not really being humble. I'm always talking about, like, you didn't think it was that worthy, but I did get recognized for this, and this, And then there are other times where he just spends a lot of time on petty grievances. Like, I'm talking about disagreements with like undergrads, not undergrads. Maybe it was a graduate student and or postdoc. It's just weird that, this, was it Harvard or something, some high level professor is spending so much of his memoir shit talking someone who was just like his underling, someone who was a postdoc or grad student. And where it's worse, where it's like he talks about it in a way that is like not explicit. It's like he uses his grad students and their lack of respect for this postdoc as evidence of how shitty this postdoc is, in a way that not only is demeaning to the postdoc, but also is demeaning to the grad students, and the fact that he uses them as an example of how pathetic the postdoc is. Because, if even a grad student thinks this low of you, I mean, these are the implications. It's not explicit. It's very much coded language, in my opinion. Then that says something about you. And it's just this. It's not even that's just one thing. It's this recurring thing. This constant. I don't understand why they're upset with me. I don't have anything against them, but they hated me for some reason, whatever. And it's just, I'll just protest too much. Like, what? Someone who spends any time on this, honestly, let alone for it to be so repetitive. Like, the one there's a pattern and there's a weird fixation on it that just feels rather pathetic. And I think just indicative of a certain type of academic who is just, I didn't like him. I have a full review on this on Goodreads, and I refer you to there. Like, it was very extensive in my problems with him. But in my mind, it reeked of someone who just, not someone that I admire at all. And even there's the side of like his family, where he talks about his family at times, but it feels so shoehorned, and it's like, oh, I need to mention my family, this family event happening. Like, his kids are mentioned when they're born and maybe when they graduate or something. It's like very, like, he's like, oh, I love my kids, I'm a great father, but I only care to mention them, in these one moments. Or maybe it was his wife was giving birth. They got married and he gave birth. And she gave birth. Like, those are the 2 events where she is relevant to the story, to his life. Same with his brother dying. His brother dies of cancer, but there's no, discussion of his relationship with his brother. But, he used that as an opportunity to try and convince us, to tell us rather than show us that their relationship, that he cared for his brother. And it's just, again, one of those sides where it just felt very shallow. Like, he wants to get a certain message across, but it certainly doesn't mesh with the overarching story of what he's actually trying to tell. 1 star, I think maybe one of the few, or if only 1 star I've read. So Stories of Your Life by Ted Chiang. I love this, 5 stars. I talked about this in my media freakout tag, so I won't rehash it too much. Like when I read Exhalation, this is just an excellent sci-fi fantasy speculative fiction that is extremely thoughtful in its setup and its design with very deliberate purpose. Perhaps the best speculative fiction, or at least short fiction writer of our time. I honestly not sure if there's anyone I could say is better than him. I wish we had some long form fiction from him. It's utterly spectacular. Then we have The Last Dragonaires of Yndrdaus, which is 4.5 stars. Last one was 5. I'm not sure if I said that. This is a almost Le Guin-esque fantasy or magical realist fantasy of this immigrant family. There's like this legend in their family of being dragon riders, and I think it's the sort of backdrop to this family dynamic, this immigrant family dynamic, following this one young child who, is, I guess, it was male at birth, but definitely presents as genderqueer in a lot of ways. One thing that really resonated with me, I absolutely loved it. And then as that backdrop is there, it sort of, we get more and more hints at that backdrop as the story goes on. And I think it has the story just really shines as having this intriguing, fantastical backdrop that is, again, very, I think an homage to Le Guin's, I think probably Earthseed, while also having just very compelling characters and a family dynamic, exploring real issues to them as immigrants. And like this sort of dragon rider aspect is like this idea or this aspect of their immigrant status as being not quite fitting in, as having this very different background of what they gave up to come here. And it just was a really beautiful story and very queer, and I love Yndrdaus, again, one of the authors, like Hayley Piper, who is woefully underappreciated in the book community, at least in the booktube community as I watch and observe. So again, highly recommend Yndrdaus. Next up, we have another nonfiction book. Or is it the first nonfiction book? Oh wait, no, it's the second one. It's the third one. Damn it, I've read multiple. What is wrong with me? Oh, okay. Read Dangerously by Azar Nafasi. This is a collection of essays in the form of letters to her late father. She's an Iranian who I believe lives in the States, so occasionally goes back to Iran, because that's like one of the conversation points she talks about. We're losing the thread. This is a collection of essays that reflects on different works of fiction, or different works of just books in general. I think it's mostly fiction. And the impact they can have on society, what it says about society, or how books are written and what they're trying to say, and how powerful they can be, and how books can be dangerous in the sense how they challenge existing norms. This overall was a spectacular essay collection, 4.5 stars. Mostly this was a very thoughtful collection that I really liked. There were some essays where I felt like she was a little short-sighted in some of the perspectives she was bringing in. Like one of the books she talks about is A Handmaid's Tale, which I understand because that's a religious theocracy, and she's from Iran, which also has a theocracy. At the same time, it's hard not to also think about the lack of intersectionality in that book and how that wasn't really explored in this. And again, it's really, honestly, a really small conversation, a really small complaint, because it's not that she doesn't explore intersectionality. It's just like in some books like that where I feel like there could have been a deeper conversation about the limitations of some of them. But in general, I thought this was a really thoughtful collection of essays that talks about books that I'm definitely more interested in reading now. Next up, am I only halfway? I'm not even sure I am halfway. The Deep Sky by Yumi Kitase. This is 4 stars. Honestly, it's the low end of 4 stars. This was a fine. It's not interstellar. Is it interstellar? Either going to a nearby star or a distant planet. I liked it in the sense that I felt like it was fairly well realized. It was thoughtful, but it felt just a little bit YA amateurish in some of the way. I think it's in its tone. I think it's a mystery in some ways, as there's like there's catastrophes on Earth, but also some that are in space. And I just couldn't help but compare this to books that have done similar things that I just felt like less effectively. Things like An Unkindness of Ghost, which is also sort of an interstellar arc, or even Lady Astronaut of Mars series by Mary Robinette Kowal. Those were 2 books or series that really, I think, were brought to mind in this book. And I just felt like it was mostly good, but it's not quite at the same level. I couldn't help but have those books in the back of my mind when I went into this. Nevertheless, that didn't stop me from reading her next novel, which I guess I'll jump a couple here, to The Stardust Grail. Honestly, I gave this 3.5 stars, which checks out in my mind. I got an audio arc of this after reading her last book. I just requested it, and oh well, I did. I think this book improves as being slightly more competent. I feel like the world building of this story, we basically have an alien species who has interacted with Earth, and that dynamic, that sort of infrastructure of this world, I think was really compelling, and generally just a more well realized setting and characters in a way that I felt like it's clear that she has evolved as an author, which is positive. For me, I think it's just the fact that I really should have read the synopsis of this book. It is, well, as it sounds, a holy grail. This sort of thing to solve all their problems of this conflict between humans and this other species. And I think it is interesting, and I think maybe a bit more mature than her first novel, in some of the ways, in some of the directions she's willing to go. And I think it really does challenge some of our expectations in terms of the morality of certain characters and our idea of right and wrong. But I think it's that core idea of finding a holy grail of sorts that I just felt like it's not a story I'm really into. I don't find it particularly compelling, and if anything, I find it just one of those things where, we're looking for a Deus Ex Machina to fix a story. And to the book's benefit, I feel like once I realized what it was doing, I think I had certain expectations, and I think it did exceed those. And honestly, 3.5, it's not a hard 3.5, because I feel like I could be convinced to go a bit higher. In general, if you like the first book, I think you'll like this one, to be honest. Next up, another nonfiction that I almost DNF'd, A History of Korea by Kyung-Moon Hwang. I gave this 2 stars. It's fine, and I guess it's comprehensive. I just found that it was very ineffective at its communication. I almost seen it because I felt like I wasn't retaining information. And this is honestly where I think, since here, which is when, late May, for the last 2 months, I have struggled getting or following a lot of nonfiction books. I found myself really having a hard time getting invested and immersed in a way that I need to be able to follow along with sort of dense type of collection. And I think maybe the fact that it's been a pattern could say that it's not the book's fault, but really to start with this book and me feeling like I can't follow this. This is just something about this that is just really dull and boring, and I'm just zoning out nonstop. I pushed through anyways. I did a lot of rewinding and rereading. I really think it was just because it was kind of short, maybe 300 pages. I got so close to finishing, I decided to finish it. But I did struggle with it. I just found it that the writing and just the design of this just not very effective. He's telling centuries or thousands of years worth of history, going back to ancient history. And it's intriguing. I just feel like there's a thread there that's being lost. We're going from one power figure to the next. I'm hearing a bunch of names, a bunch of dates, and I'm not finding it working as far as drawing a picture. It very much feels, almost honestly, like I'm reading a Wikipedia article about every time period. And it's like, this is so lacking in detail that I'm not really retaining much. So I just don't think it was a good intro to me. Next up, we have a reread by Dimitri Nasrallah, Hotline, 5 stars. I told this in my mid-year freakout tag, my favorite reread of the year. It is a phenomenal immigrant story by a Canadian author. Anyway, it's 1980s. She was a French teacher, but she's not being hired because she has an accent. And instead, she has to take a job at a call line center where they're trying to sell a weight loss drug. And I think what I loved about this was the character work is just extremely solid. The mother and her son. Also, her relationship to the people she talks to in the call line center, in the call center, where there's just such an empathy with her in every aspect of her life, coupled with the dynamic, the things she has to experience in personal life as an immigrant and in her past, that it all just makes for an extremely emotional and just gripping story that I 100% recommend. Moving on in this extremely long wrap up. Okay. We have a series of rereads, Middle Game and Seasonal Fears, and eventually I read Tidal Creatures. I did a full review of Tidal Creatures, Middle Game 5 stars, Seasonal Fears 3 stars, and Tidal Creatures 4 stars. I'm not ready to change that. I can see myself rereading Tidal Creatures and maybe giving a little bit less. Overall, I think it definitely is a step up from Seasonal Fears, but still there's an almost amateurness to it compared to Middle Game, with the way in which Sean McGuire is communicating this world building can at times be repetitive and overly expositional dumping. I do like a detailed conversation about this book and this series and what the Middle Game does right versus where she falls short in the next two books. I will refer you to that for a full conversation. Next up, does not match up on Goodreads. Dare Me by Megan Abbott. Okay, I'm tired. Megan Abbott, 3 stars. This is a YA high school book about these cheerleaders. I was reading it for a reading project that I've been referring to all year, and it was fine. I think it was compelling, honestly, a well-written, compelling story. I think my problem is that the issues it's dealing with, mental health, bullying, and just various mental health issues, I don't think it is really having a serious conversation about them so much as just using them for the sake of using them. And it just felt a little shallow in what it was trying to do. So a fine book, honestly, but I think it was fun enough. But I think it could have been better. I could see the author saying she was trying to do something, but I don't think she did something. Next up, we have How Do You Live by Gonzalo Yoshino. 3.5 stars. This is the book that apparently inspired The Boy and the Heron. And I read it because I love The Boy and the Heron. And I can't say I love this book. I don't hate it. 3.5 stars is a solid rating. I think it's a classic and it's a translation. I think it's very apparent in that sense because it just wasn't the easiest thing to read, I guess. But it was a thoughtful book about a young boy just trying to make friends and understand how to be a good friend. So it's heartwarming. The connection between it and the film, I'm missing something. I can say it is not. I did not realize at the time that it's not a one-to-one adaptation, and honestly, I don't quite see the connection. I've been wanting to rewatch the film to try and appreciate better the way it ties in, but a fine book. Not quite what I was hoping for, but it was fine. Next up, 5 Minute Votes by Michael Iskov. 4.5 stars. This one isn't the best nonfiction ever, but it is extremely compelling narrative nonfiction. Basically about the case against Donald Trump and his attempt to overturn the Georgia election. And it starts through the lens of looking at Fani Willis. This was released right before the issues relating to, actually so much has happened since it was released. We had the scandal with her and one of her hired prosecutors. And of course, then we have the cases about immunity. We have Biden dropping out, just a series of things that happened. The takeaway I think I want to give for this in this conversation, because actually I have a similar review that I recorded after I read that I haven't posted yet because I haven't had a chance to put it up. I think this is a perfect example of how you take a significant historical event, communicate it using the facts, while also crafting a coherent narrative. You take the facts, but then you don't just present the facts as they are. You put some creative liberty in there to make sure it's a clear narrative of what actually was happening, to give some perspective. And I think there was a line there as far as as journalistic integrity of what you're telling the reader to think versus what actually happened. But I also have read books that lean too much into the just being a list of historical events without that added context I think is necessary to make it a really good book. So keep an eye out for that review if you're intrigued. If you're curious if you should read it. If you're a Georgian, absolutely. If you're American, probably. If you're not American, it's something that's really relevant to you. And then we have The Afterlife of Mal Caldera by Nadi Reed Perez. 4 stars. I originally gave this 4.5. Nadi is a non-binary author, and I was really excited to read this work. I think I can see it because it's a very queer book. I can say very queer. It is queer, but not as queer as I would have liked. It has solid character work. I think that's part of what I liked about this was that you have this world where this character has died and she has to learn to survive as a ghost. In general, I like the dynamics between her and the people around her, and I think it had some really decent character work. I say decent because I don't think it was necessarily exceptional. There's something about this world, about his characters, that doesn't feel entirely fleshed out, but also not like completely non-existent. It's hints at being 4 stars. I think this is a solid example of a book that deserves to be 4 stars. A well-realized story. The setup of her being a ghost and the dynamics there doesn't feel particularly new, but it still, I felt like, did a good job of exploring, I think, intergenerational trauma, religious trauma, and someone who struggles in their life to overcome certain obstacles, and just the complexities of human interactions. Solid book. It was a arc. I haven't really said anything about his being arcs. Solid Creatures was an arc. Wait, I missed a book. Let's go back. Another nonfiction, we have Mapping the Heavens by Premavata Natarajan. 4 stars, a science history book. And honestly, I really like this. Even though I think it's a little bit higher, I think, than I gave Alien Earth. I think it's the perfect example of a book that is telling things that have been told before, but in a way that is, I think, really does stand out as a really good example of how to tell science history in a way that is compelling and I think gives new perspective. The history it's giving is not just any history. I think it is trying to give context to how radical ideas were first proposed, how the world responded to them, and how it eventually became mainstream. And that is what it is. That's the new perspective it's giving, is it's helping us give context to how mainstream ideas have, how the scientific process works. It gives a new insight into that to help us understand as the reader, how this process works and how things gain the traction they do, and how things don't just start being accepted as being, the truth, especially the really radical ideas like things like Einstein. And that is what's really compelling and new here. It's that conversation, that perspective that she brings. Honestly, this is a very high 4 stars. Very high 4 stars. I could see it even being high if I were to reread it. This is a strong recommend when it comes to science history, and I definitely think it's a good introduction, and also a good way of understanding how science works. I'm not sure I'm following my Goodreads scroll. It's not going to make my job easy when I'm editing this. Jesus Christ. Remake by Connie Willis. I gave this 3 stars. It is a very soft 3 stars. It could be lower. This is a book that has to do with AI being used to make film. There's several problems here. Like, I read this because of where we're at, obviously, in the recent Hollywood strikes, actor strike that is, and writer strike, and the way AI is fitting in that conversation. I feel like this book, one, was just very much too embedded in the culture, the pop culture of its time. So it's extremely dated in that aspect. And I also just felt like the conversation around AI and its usefulness and the shortcomings and the flaws there, it just wasn't really explored. It wasn't the story she wanted to tell. And the story she did tell relating on this actress who was in a film she shouldn't have been in, and it's like a weird mystery that I wasn't that invested in, honestly. And I just was kind of bored. And honestly, this is, again, a very soft 3 stars. If this was going to change, it'd be going down. I cannot recommend it. Goodbye, Mr. Chips by James Hilton. This is a classic. I found this underwhelming. There's a good chance that it's going to be on my most disappointing. Mostly because, I give it 3 stars. It's totally fine. It's reflecting on this, not high school, it's a private school teacher who was retiring, kind of being forced out. And he's very beloved. And it's sort of reflecting on his life, him being his wife, and some relationships with his students. And I thought it was fine. I just didn't find this story of this old white man. I just found it it's heartwarming, but I just didn't feel like it didn't really remind me of the love I have with some of my teachers. I want to feel that, and I couldn't. It didn't quite fully explore these dynamics. It was more like an homage to this teacher without really diving into it. It's a very short book. And I see how people love this. It just didn't do what it was trying to do for me. And I think it's just a very personal reason why I just found it kind of mid. That one was another one that I read for a reading project. And I think when that project comes out, it'll become clearer why I can't help but see this as lacking in some sense. I can't explore it now without giving away what I'm talking about. But there's just certain dynamics when it comes to teachers that I think is complex and nuanced. I would have liked to see that there, some deeper exploration of the dynamics between teachers and students and what makes a good teacher versus just this idea of this perfect teacher in our mind. I'll leave it at that for now. Next up, we have 3.5 stars. Shane Hawk, the editor of Never Whistle at Night, an Indigenous dark fiction anthology. This was fine, but it was a very mixed bag. I was trying to take my time with this, and in the process of doing that, I ended up taking months. I finished this in June. Wow. I feel like I finished it long ago, but it was like a month ago. And I think I started it in January or sooner. And I just found myself not wanting to continue. Like, there were some stories that were really good, others that were very mid, and others that were just not great. And I just found overall the collection had a lot of stories that felt like it's what it brought down some of the great ones. I just struggled, honestly. Then we have a series of some rereads. I started rereading the Demonata series by Darren Shane, Beck and Demon Thief. What can I say about this? I wouldn't recommend this series. I feel the love that I had for it originally, but I feel like there's a lot of shortcomings. And as I said in my Media Freakout tag, we'll probably do a full review of that series, mostly because I just want to reflect on this series that was arguably my favorite series as a kid, honestly, even more than Harry Potter. And what I loved about it versus what I feel like it really had the shortcomings of, and whether or not it's a series that is worth remaining as a part of the conversation for new young adult readers. I mean, after that we have another horror. Both of those are 3.5, I should say, and I think that's actually kind of generous. Ronald Malfi, Small Town Horror, 3.5 stars. This one, it's weird that this one is rated the same as the other two, because I feel like, actually maybe that is too high. Maybe I should go to 3. Damn it, I am gonna do that. 3 for the two Demon Hunter books, because they're definitely beneath Small Town Horror. I just found Small Town Horror it fell into the trope of these kids from a small town do something tragic happens with them, and they sort of separate and they come back together as adults as there's a supernatural threat of related to what happened to them as kids that comes about. I thought this was fine. I think my problem is this is one of those rare cases where I could not appreciate characters that I found very despicable. And they are. They're just really shitty people. And I think that's part of my problem with Ghost Story by Peter Straub. This one, not nearly as bad. Like, there was more here, and more here than I think I liked. And I also feel like this story is not nearly as overwritten as that Peter Straub's Ghost Story. I just think I would have liked a bit more retribution than we get. Not to say that we don't get that. I don't want to spoil it. I don't think I did a long review for this, and I don't think I will. Overall, it was a trope that I really like. I don't mind using old tropes. I guess I just thought it was going to do more with that trope, but really it's just leaning into the trope and doing what's been done before. I liked his writing. I thought he was really good at setting the tone, the vibe, and I probably could read him again. But I had hoped that this book would do more for me, and ultimately it did not, obviously. Then we have several books that I've talked about. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, 5 stars. I love this, the story of a queer Asian immigrant boy and his relationship to his mother and his life. And as I talked about in the Media Freakout tag, this really resonated with me. That story of this queer boy, his identity, and trying to understand himself, his relationship with his mother. It was just really beautiful, really well narrated by the author in the audiobook, and easy to recommend. One of my favorite books of the year. What Makes This Book So Great by Jo Walton, 4.5 stars, a collection of blog posts, or basically essays, that really are just the casualness of a blog post, about different books that she's been rereading. The book was originally published in 2014 as an audio adaptation. And the audio adaptation was really good, I think. I think the book, it surprised me, as I explained in my Media Freakout tag, because it was surprisingly compelling. We talk about so many books I'd never heard of, and there were a lot of books now that I want to read. And it really just feels like you're talking to the author, like she's having a conversation with you. It was really fun reading from people who love books, especially speculative fiction. This is I think a great book that reflects on some real classics. What makes them good, what makes them bad, and some stuff like, why we love rereading. Definite surprise, and probably one of my favorite non-fictions of the year. Finally, Longitude by David Sobel. I gave this 4 stars, but I still feel like it's 3.5. I struggled with this. I read it in my most recent biking vlog, or the longest bike ride of my life, yay. I struggled with it, and then I reread it, and I think it's kind of like the story of the history of Korea, where I was just struggling to follow in my relationship to nonfiction. Once I got to a new environment, better headspace, I was able to follow along. It's basically the story of how we discovered how to measure longitude, where it's really hard for just reasons about, how do you can't really, you can measure your latitude in certain ways, but it's really difficult to establish where you're at. I don't remember what they established, so I guess it tells you how much of an imprint it made. It was really just the dynamic of how they were figuring this out, and some of the drama about who was trying to get to it first, who was getting forgot, or who was getting like pushed aside because they wanted the glory. And that was intriguing, but ultimately it's still just a little bit dull. Hence why I think the original 4 stars I gave is probably too much. 3.5 is a good one there. And those are all the books that I've read. Thank you so much for watching. I am exhausted. I don't know if I regret this. I guess we'll see when I edit it. I did enjoy talking about it. I'm glad I did. The last time I really wanted to talk about those books and I didn't in my last wrap up. I think I'm going to stick with this even though it's a lot. I think it's going to be worth it. I don't know. I'm reading a lot more lately than I have been, so it's making it difficult. Either way, thanks for watching. I appreciate you and hope you have a great day. Stay safe, and I'll see you all next time.